Part 8. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, Mocnu. Chapter 71. As soon as the purple-robed man appeared in the hall, he used his ability to bewitch hundreds of humans, including many awakened ones. His strength left a deep impression on several people. They even thought that this purple-robed man was the final boss of this alien church stronghold. No one expected that they would encounter this awakened person with powerful spiritual powers in this room. You control these survivors and let them live in their own spiritual world. That's why they look so excited, but in fact they haven't come out of their fantasy world at all. Mewtwo told the truth calmly. The purple-robed man was not angry at Mewtwo's words. Instead, he looked at Mewtwo with an appreciative tone. If I hadn't seen your abilities, I would have thought you were an awakened person with extraordinary spiritual talents. Boy, do you want to join? The purple-robed man was halfway through his words when he paused again. Hey, let's forget it. I prefer to strangle a genius like you in the cradle. Tisk, 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 tisk. Listening to the purple-robed man talking to himself like a maniac, everyone couldn't laugh at all, and they were already on guard in their hearts. After all, this is a powerful existence that can easily confuse hundreds of humans. The ice-making boy's powers look familiar. If my guess is correct, it was you who destroyed Experiment 007, right? Everyone looked at each other in confusion, and then realized that the experimental product in the purple robe's mouth should be the big-headed monster baby that the team met in the hospital before. Now is the right time to settle the accounts from last time together. As the purple-robed man spoke, an invisible spiritual wave that only Mewtwo could feel spread through the room. Next, let me see the fear deep in your hearts, GG. Although he was right in front of them, the purple-robed man's words became softer and softer, until finally, they were as faint as mosquitoes in everyone's ears. The strange thing is that the surrounding scene gradually changes in front of everyone's eyes. Qingfei. A familiar voice echoed in my ears. Concubine Lu Qing turned her head in a daze, only to find that she was in a ruins. Before she could figure out what was going on, the scene in front of her completely disrupted her thoughts. In front of her, a man in a suit was lying on the ground in a bloody state. Surrounded by a dozen zombies with ferocious faces and white pupils were eating the man's flesh and blood. In the distance, zombies kept rushing forward, biting and fighting for the man's body. This man covered in blood is his fiancée who has been missing for 2 years. Su Feng. Lu Qingfei covered her mouth in disbelief and cried. She rushed forward to save the man, but found that her body was stuck in a mud wall and she couldn't move at all. She could only watch helplessly as the living limbs of her longing for husband were removed by zombies one after another, gnawing at the flesh crazily like a hungry beast. What's even more frightening is that her husband's head is facing her the whole time, his eyes are wide open, and his mouth is constantly wailing, save me, concubine Qing. We agreed to get married. I am your husband, concubine Qing. Why? Why don't you come to save me? Why? The man's speech became faster and faster, and the questions from his mouth became more and more sharp, but the only thing that remained unchanged was his body that was eaten to a bloody pulp. Hearing her husband's questioning, Lu Qingfei couldn't help but shake her head, with tears on her face. No, I have been looking for you for the past 2 years, You lied, the man scolded. Did you fall in love with another man? You broke our agreement. I didn't, Lu Qingfei looked directly at the man and shouted. The two looked at each other, and time seemed to freeze at this moment. You don't love me anymore, right? Suddenly, the man calmed down, and his remaining head looked at concubine Lu Qing. A line of bloody tears flowed from the man's eyes. At this moment, concubine Lu Qing finally couldn't hold back anymore and squatted on the ground, covering her ears and crying loudly. Dad. The 5-year-old daughter beside him handed the peeled apple to Chen Weiguo. Chen Weiguo, who had just left the construction site, took the apple, rubbed his daughter's head, and smiled happily. The little girl seemed to have received some reward, and she jumped happily to the side. Chen Weiguo turned around and looked at his wife beside him. At this moment, the wife was carefully cutting another apple with a fruit knife and feeding it to her daughter's mouth, with a loving smile on her face. In this small rental house of less than 50 square meters, it seems that the most beautiful emotions in the world exist. Seeing this heartwarming scene, Chen Weiguo somehow felt a warm current surge in his heart, and the fatigue of the day after work was swept away at this moment. He stepped forward and hugged his wife and daughter, secretly vowing to protect them no matter what, so that his wife and daughter could live a good life. But at the next moment, the door was suddenly slammed open by a huge force. Zombies covered in blood rushed in from outside the house. Chen Weiguo's eyes were horrified, and he was instantly knocked down by several zombies. Severe pain came from his body, but he didn't care at all. In front of him were his wife and daughter, but they were also being eaten by several zombies. No. Watching his wife and daughter being bitten into two fleshless skeletons in front of his eyes, Chen Weiguo was filled with misery and despair, and his calloused hands scratched the floor with blood marks. At the same time, the other members of the team were also experiencing the deepest fear in their hearts. The purple-robed man peeped into everyone's inner world, with a mocking sneer on his face. His ability was a spiritual power called HeartNet. He could easily probe his spiritual power into other people's inner world, urging the most vulnerable part of their hearts, so that they could be hypnotized or indulged in his own world. What he liked to appreciate most was the secrets buried deep in other people's hearts, which could easily destroy the fear in a person's heart. Whenever he saw the painful expressions on these people's faces, it would make his body tremble with excitement and his scalp numb. Suddenly, he found that the mental fluctuations of two people were extremely abnormal, and his own mind showed signs of backlash once he entered. This made the purple-robed man feel a little surprised, because he was a top-level A-level psychic. It can be said that except for the powerful S-level existences, these ordinary awakeners could not escape his mind net. His ability has been tried and tested on these awakeners, but now he has encountered two difficult existences at the same time. Thinking of this, the purple-robed man could not help but divide a part of his mental power, intending to personally enter the spiritual world of these two people to find out. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the Flame Demon Lord. Author, Mo Xianyu. Chapter 72. This girl. The purple-robed man's consciousness sank into the spiritual world of a girl wearing an orange-red goldfish suit below. Once the spiritual fluctuations he released before entered the girl's spiritual world, they were like mud sinking into the sea without any movement. This time, the purple-robed man's spiritual consciousness entered in person, but found that he was in the ruins of a city that had long been dead. Unlike the old cities in the real world, the buildings here were strangely destroyed and disintegrated by a kind of purple crystal. The seemingly gorgeous purple crystals were deeply embedded in the ground of the high-rise buildings, and they could not withstand the collapse and shattered in the next second. The whole world was empty and silent, as if it was on the verge of collapse at any time. In the distance, there was a blue beam of light rushing straight into the sky. The purple-robed man's spiritual body floated in the air and floated over, but saw that it was actually a towering tree made of purple crystals. On the trunk of the purple crystal giant tree, there was a woman who looked similar to the pink-haired girl outside, and her arms were tied up with a purple crystal chain. The purple-robed man was looking at the incredible purple crystal tree in surprise, but the girl tied to the tree suddenly opened her eyes. Two bunches of pink hair were tied on her cheeks, and there was a faint smile in her purple-red pupils. She looked up at the purple-robed man floating in the air. Somehow, the purple-robed man was captured by the strange red pupils when he saw this woman for the first time, and his whole body trembled instantly. The purple-robed man looked at the woman with fear, and this spirit composed of spiritual energy fled from this strange spiritual world as fast as lightning. The purple-robed man who returned to the real world had cold sweat on his forehead and took a deep look at the pink-haired girl with closed eyes below. Just now, he had a glimpse of the pink-haired girl in the spiritual world, and he felt like he was going to be spiritually backfired. The purple-robed man who stabilized his mind planned to deal with other people first, and then contact his companions to control the girl. He was also very curious about what secrets were hidden in the girl's spiritual world. Thinking of this, the purple-robed man looked at Miu-Chiu, who was just below. He saw clearly on the monitor that this guy was an elemental awakener who used ice. It might be difficult for others to deal with him, but for him, this kind of awakener with weak spirit was the easiest to invade. His best ability was to disintegrate the enemy from the inside. This time, the purple-robed man immersed all his mind into Miu-Chiu's inner world. He had already seen that Miu-Chiu had the highest combat power in the entire team, and was also the focus of the purple-robed man's target. Tianlai Novel Network. As usual, it was extremely simple to invade the mind of Miu-Chiu, an A-level awakener. According to his previous experience, the more powerful the awakener, the more darkness and filth there is in his heart. The purple-robed man showed a happy smile on his face. He couldn't wait to see what the spiritual world of this rare elemental awakener was like. However, the moment the purple-robed man's spirit appeared in Miu-Chiu's heart, the purple-robed man's face froze. What is this? What appeared in front of the purple-robed man was a brand new world he had never seen before. The boundless sea of fire spread across the sky, and the whole sky was burned by the thick fire. The hot flames surged like a wave, as if the next moment the sea of fire would be flooded and burn everything in the world. On the ground, thousands of miles of glaciers condensed the mountains, rivers, and plants on the earth. Everything in sight was frozen, as if the biting ice from the Arctic invaded the entire land. But the whole world became a dividing line, dividing the upper and lower worlds of ice and fire. It was this extremely shocking scene that shocked the purple-robed man. He had peeked into the spiritual world of countless people, but never had a heart as grand and magnificent as this one. But in the middle of this world, a magnificent throne made of gorgeous amethysts descended into this world like a god. A black-robed figure sat on the amethyst throne, overlooking the world, as if everything in the world was an ant under his feet, looking down on the world. Behind the throne, a dark red dragon was circling around the purple crystal throne. The dragon galloped through the world, a pair of red eyes flashing, and flames rose and entangled in the body. The roar was even more earth-shaking and mighty. But such a terrifying dragon, which could span the sky and the earth, lowered its mighty head when it swam to the figure on the throne, like an obedient kitten. The figure on the throne gently stroked the huge head of the dragon, and slowly turned his head to look at the purple-robed man floating in the air in the distance. When he saw the face on the throne clearly, a deep look of horror appeared in the pupils of the purple-robed man. The figure sitting on the throne was the target of his journey through the Sea of Heart, the awakener of the element system, Miu-Chiu. He didn't understand why Miu-Chiu's spiritual world was so vast and magnificent, and there was even such a terrifying existence as the Red Dragon. When Miu-Chiu looked at him, his indifferent eyes showed a hint of amusement and smile. The purple-robed man was sweating profusely on his forehead, and subconsciously drove his spirit to escape from the sea of mind space. But he found that his spirit seemed to be imprisoned and could not break through the space at all. How is it possible? The purple-robed man was shocked. The Sea of Mind shuttle that had been successful before was out of function at this time. This situation will only happen if the opponent's strength is far greater than yours. The purple-robed man looked at Miu-Chiu with horror, but found that Miu-Chiu, who was wearing a black robe, was sitting on the purple crystal throne without moving. Miu-Chiu patted the head of the red dragon lightly, and the red dragon looked in the direction of the purple-robed man, and its red pupils seemed to be burning with an endless sea of fire. The dragon's eyes showed a fierce look, roared, and danced with its huge body towards the purple-robed man. No. Don't. The fragile spirit of the purple-robed man was swallowed and burned by the huge dragon in an instant, leaving only a wailing scream between heaven and earth. He swallowed the purple-robed man's spirit into his stomach, his expression was shocked, and he roared to the sky. The red dragon returned to the purple crystal throne under Muchu's seat. The world returned to silence again, and only the rolling sea of fire on the horizon made a dull sound from time to time. Muchu stood quietly on the throne, and the world seemed to be silent, and the ferocious dragon behind him also dimmed. From a distance, the black figure on the purple crystal throne seemed to merge with the red dragon, indistinguishable from each other. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, Mo. Chapter 73. No. Lu Qingfei screamed and woke up from the nightmare. There was a strong palpitation in the depths of her eyes, and her heart was beating violently. She touched her wet eyes, and 2 lines of tears were flowing down from her eyes. What's going on? Lu Qingfei had not yet recovered from the nightmare just now, but she saw that the team members around her were also full of grief, and they couldn't stop crying. Even Chen Weiguo, the oldest in the team, had lost his usual calmness at this moment. He was heartbroken and cried with his head in his hands. The fat man covered his face and rolled on the ground crying. Muchu gently stroked Yuqi's pink hair. The girl understood, and a heavenly singing voice came out of her rosy cherry mouth. The gentle singing echoed in the karaoke room. As Yuqi's considerate and beautiful singing reached everyone's ears, the sad mood in the team was slowly disintegrating. What happened to us? The crowd realized that what had just happened was just a terrible nightmare. Stared at by everyone with tears in their eyes, Muchu smiled lightly and turned to look aside. I think I can ask him this question. Everyone looked closely and found that there was a figure lying on the ground. It was the purple-robed man from the heterogeneous church. But at this time, the purple-robed man had lost the mysterious momentum of facing hundreds of people alone in the hall. He was lying on his back on the ground, his eyes were empty, his expression was stupid, his breath was weak, and it was obvious that he was not going to survive. Muchu explained, he wanted to use superpowers to invade our spiritual world, but he was not good at learning and could not control the hearts of so many people. He was backlashed by superpowers and became like this. Great. I said, how could I be cheated? It turned out that it was this old guy who did it. The fat man cursed angrily, ran to the purple-robed man, and spat fiercely. The spirits of the others were relieved a lot after being baptized by Yuichi's singing, but from their red eyes, it can be seen that they have not completely come out of the nightmare just now. The purple-robed man is far from the level of weaving nightmares. He just led them into the nightmare that they fear the most in their hearts, but because of this, the experience given to the team members is more real. Muchu and the others smiled and said nothing. Of course, this purple-robed man was not backfired because of his poor skills. The truth is that the purple-robed man was devoured along with his spirit and soul as soon as he entered his heartsea world. The body left in the real world at this moment is just an empty shell without a soul. It seems that they are all innocent people who are controlled. After learning the truth, Lu Qingfei looked at the bodies of several survivors killed by Muchu and couldn't help but sigh and regret. How can there be a result without a cause? Muchu did not feel guilty about this. If these people did not have evil thoughts in their hearts, how could they indulge in their own world and be controlled by the purple-robed man? After searching for a while, this was the result. A powerful psychic from the heterogeneous church was solved. Everyone didn't understand whether this was good or bad. The team members adjusted and came to the hallway where they had agreed to gather. But they found that many search teams had gathered here. Among them, there were several familiar faces: the playboy Chu Nan, who was dressed in flashy clothes, the charming Lu Qianqian, and several co-workers of Chen Weiguo. They were all lucky to follow the team to break through the monsters on more than 10 floors and finally survived. They just split up to search for survivors on this floor. But at this moment, they looked quite nervous. At the same time, some search teams also caught several people wearing black robes, who were obviously from the heterogeneous church. "I told you to sneak attack me, you really don't want to live." The flashy Chunan threw a black-robed man under him and kicked him hard on the head. Chunan seemed to be stimulated by something, and a deep blood mark appeared on his face, and his expression became a little ferocious. "You, if you want to die, I'll grant your wish." As Chunan's voice became more and more sinister, the strength of his feet became stronger and stronger, and finally he kicked the head of the alien cultist like a watermelon, and the red and white splashed all over the ground, and stained Chunan's trouser legs. "WWW. So unlucky." Chunan cursed again. Like the others, he was also attacked by the alien cultists while searching for survivors, and even his face, which he always cherished, was left with scars. It seems that the others were also attacked. Wei Linger glanced around, but found that the team of only a few dozen people was missing again. Until now, there was no news about the missing people, and everyone had the answer in their hearts. Muqiu noticed that the alien cult members captured by these search teams were all wearing black robes, and only their team encountered alien cultists wearing purple robes. It seems that there is also a hierarchy in the heterogeneous religion. Muqiu couldn't help but sigh that life is not easy. This evil class division exists at any time and anywhere. Like the purple-robed heterogeneous religionist with psychic power just now, it is obvious that his psychic power has almost reached the peak level of Class A. His energy far exceeds that of other awakened people, plus his strange psychic power. It can be said that there are few rivals below Class S. Unfortunately, he encountered an existence that surpassed Class S. The men in black robes captured by these search teams were relatively weaker, but they were all awakened ones who had reached B level. Ji Yufeng was followed by several subordinates of the law enforcement team standing in front of the team. The law enforcement team who are still here are almost the elite of the elite. Ji Yufeng picked up a heretic and asked, "Where are the other survivors in this building?" The corners of the pagan's mouth in black robes were cracked, revealing bloodshot teeth. With a sinister smile, they are in my belly, ha ha ha." Bang. The blade flashed, and a pistol appeared in Ji Yufeng's hand. It penetrated the head of the heretic cultist directly, and blood spurted out. Ji Yufeng's face remained as cold as ever, not even the slightest bit moved even though he was about to face the final life and death battle. He turned to look at the few members of the search team and law enforcement team in the corridor, and slowly said, "Pull up all your spirits, this is the final battle." After saying that, Ji Yufeng took the lead and stepped onto the steps in front of him that were paved with blood-soaked blankets. On the top of the steps is the top floor of this luxurious building called Daishanti Entertainment Club, and it will also be the ultimate goal of this clearing operation. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the Flame Demon Lord. Author, Mo Xianyu. Chapter 74. The words Medieval European Castle Experience Center are carved in stone at the top of the wide corridor. The passage leading to the top floor of the clubhouse is particularly strange. The bright red carpet seems to be soaked in blood, and the dark walls are actually made of schist rocks. An iron door suddenly appeared in front of everyone's eyes. The iron chain on it was still rusty. At first glance, the style looked like the door of a European castle. At this moment, more than half a day had passed since everyone entered the building. After rounds of fighting, only a few dozen people were left in the original team of several hundred people. There were several searcher teams and remaining members of the law enforcement team mixed in, but most of them were scarred and looked tired. Ji Yufeng, who was walking at the front among dozens of people, had a normal expression, and even the white suit he was wearing was not dirty. What makes everyone confused is that as the most powerful white god of death in the team, no one has seen him take action along the way. If Ji Yufeng took action, he would definitely avoid the casualties of many members. This made many of the surviving searchers feel resentful about this, and the expressions on their faces were also very strange. Everyone walked to the huge iron gate. Ji Yufeng looked calm and stretched out his hand to slowly open the heavy castle gate. Boom! After the door opened, everyone was greeted. What he saw in his eyes was a vast and deep hall. The entire floor was transformed into a medieval castle palace. The decoration of the main hall is really like a European castle. Even the carpets on both sides of the corridor are filled with medieval European-style elements. It is a strange portrait of pagan culture, but what is depicted is an ugly, evil, and terrifying heretic. Several pieces of steel armor stained with blood were particularly obvious in the hall. A row of candles were placed on the walls on both sides, making the atmosphere of the entire corridor particularly dark. In the middle of the dark hall, on the huge pillar that carries the entire club building, is a dark green ball that is hugged by several people. It is filled with smoke, as if it is filled with life. Everyone pushed open the door and walked into the hall warily. What they saw was such a strange scene. Ba bang bang. Suddenly, a burst of violent applause sounded from the deepest part of the hall. As the applause rang out, the candles on the walls of the entire hall burned fiercely, illuminating the entire empty and dark hall. Everyone was shocked. When they looked up, they saw a skeleton throne placed in the deepest part of the hall. On both sides of the throne stood more than a dozen members of the heterogeneous cult wearing robes. Several of the faces were the human survivors they had rescued before. And in front of these heretic believers, there were actually several members of the law enforcement team lying down. The members of the law enforcement team had their hands and feet cut off and fell to the ground covered in bruises, moaning helplessly in pain. I really admire you for making it this far. You are worthy of being a law enforcement team under the command of the white god of death in Yuhei. A slightly hoarse laugh came, and everyone turned their attention to the owner of the voice. The figure on the skull throne slowly stood up, the bright candlelight reflected on the red robe he was wearing, and then there was a handsome young face. The strange thing is that although the face of this young man in red robe is handsome, his complexion is sickly pale, and the corners of his eyes are also abnormally scarlet. Just by looking like this, he looks like a vampire noble in a Western movie. The young man in red robe stood up and looked towards a certain direction behind the team. The smile on his face faded, and a touch of affection suddenly appeared in his eyes. Long time no see, concubine Qing, my wife. Why, how could it be you? Concubine Lu Qing, who was at the deepest part of the crowd, looked at the man in red robes on the skeleton throne, covering her mouth with disbelief in her pupils. Su Feng, why are you here? The man in red robe on the throne of the main hall is her husband who she has been missing for 2 years and has been searching for 2 years, Su Feng. Su Feng, who was wearing a red robe, suddenly chuckled when he heard Lu Qingfei's unbelievable words and said, why? Then he opened his arms and laughed wildly, because the entire club is my property. How could it be? You clearly said you were on a business trip to Lannan City. Lu Qingfei couldn't believe that she would meet her husband again under such circumstances. Ji Yufeng looked at the smiling man in red robe, seemed to understand something, and said, are you the leader of this alien church stronghold? Su Feng ignored him, but with a gentle look in his eyes, he said to concubine Lu Qing, don't worry concubine Qing, you will be back with me soon. Then he looked at Ji Yufeng, who was at the front of the team, and said with a smile, the white god of death came to the club in person, which really made me wait for Pengpi to shine. There was a sinister sneer on Su Feng's pale face. Oh, by the way, I almost forgot the gift that came to my door. As he spoke, Su Feng opened his palms, and an invisible force attracted a member of the law enforcement team on the ground. A scene that shocked everyone appeared. There was a bloody mouth with sharp teeth in the middle of Su Feng's open palm. The member of the law enforcement team was attracted by Su Feng, and the bloody mouth in his palm bit the neck of the law enforcement team member. Veins suddenly popped out on the man's face, his eye sockets protruded, his face was full of pain, and his body began to struggle violently. At the same time, it seemed as if something was rapidly draining from the man's body, just like a plant that had been drained of nutrients. In almost the blink of an eye, the body of this strong law enforcement team man began to shrink and lose weight rapidly, and his struggling movements slowed down. Everyone watched helplessly as the law enforcement team member was sucked into a shriveled corpse. Su Feng, who was dressed in a red robe, threw down the shriveled corpse with reluctance, and a sickly blood color appeared on his pale face. Fresh human blood is really a delicious delicacy. Everyone looked at the man on the skull throne in horror, with different expressions on their faces. Anger, hatred, surprise, fear, indifference, all kinds of different expressions appeared in the crowd. The one who reacted the most was Lu Qingfei, the fiancée of the red-robed man. Lu Qingfei covered her mouth and looked at the red-robed man standing in the depths of the hall with a satisfied face. She still couldn't imagine that this cruel, bloody, devil-like man was her husband she had been thinking about day and night. Mu Qiu, who was standing in the team, looked at Su Feng with a smile on his face. It's a bit interesting. I didn't expect that the final boss of this mission would be Lu Qingfei's husband. This is a bit like a melodramatic romance drama. Besides, Su Feng's ability also made Mu Qiu feel interesting. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the Flame Demon Lord. Author, Mo Xianyu. Chapter 75. Vampire. Mu Qiu looked at the final boss Su Feng in a red robe. If he was not mistaken, Su Feng should be a mutant awakener who had awakened the vampire bat gene. Sucking the blood of others to enhance one's own strength is similar to Mu Qiu's swallowing, but the effect is of course very different. And Mu Qiu also sensed Su Feng's ability level, it was S level above A level. However, the energy fluctuations emitted from his body were very unstable, and his level was only stuck at the early stage of S level. Although the power obtained by sucking blood can quickly improve strength, it is always a little different from the regular ability users. Moreover, Su Feng is now facing a veteran and powerful S-level awakener, Ji Yufeng, who is known as the White Death. The strength of the dozen or so awakeners of the heterogeneous religion around Su Feng is mostly at the B level, and there are dozens of such awakeners on Ji Yufeng's side. It can be said that based on the current lineup, the heterogeneous cult has no advantage at all. Mu Qiu was a little curious about what means Su Feng was going to use to equalize this extreme disadvantage. Ji Yufeng looked at Su Feng indifferently in front of the throne. If this is all you have, you can prepare your last words in advance. Su Feng's pale face was filled with a wild smile. Friends from Yuhei have come from afar, how can I not entertain them? As he said that, he stood in front of the hall and looked at the remaining team, and asked back, aren't you always curious about where the original survivors of this building are? Su Feng pointed to the heterogeneous cultists beside him, those who are willing to join us are all here. As for those who are unwilling. Su Feng's face suddenly showed a strange sneer, and he lowered his head, waved his red robe, and slowly pressed a remote control in his hand. The people present suddenly noticed that the surrounding walls made a sound at a certain distance. Boom! The walls around the hall were suddenly smashed by a huge force, and several tall and terrifying figures walked out from it, attacking everyone with amazing supernatural power fluctuations. What is this? Monsters! I saw that several terrifying monsters with human faces and beast bodies came out of the wall. The shadow of a huge spider enveloped many awakened people, with densely packed limbs, thick and strong, and the hair on the limbs was extremely sharp. The huge body of several meters was almost hitting the ceiling of the hall, and the ferocious fangs were cold and murderous. The most touching and terrifying thing was the position of the head of this huge spider monster, where a woman's head was embedded in the original compound eyes. The woman's originally beautiful appearance became hideous and terrifying, with white eyes and messy hair. When facing the search team, she had a crazy killing intent, just like a demon crawling out of the abyss of hell. This is an S-level monster. Following closely behind were several huge human-faced monsters, including fly monsters with wide wings and a mouthful of mucus, fierce Tibetan mastiffs with strong limbs and sharp fangs, and even mechanical modified humans covered in steel and full of technology. But without exception, the heads of these monster heretics were all hideous and painful human faces. What's more terrifying is that the energy fluctuations emitted by these monsters far exceeded the many awakened people present, approaching S level. Looking at the army of monsters approaching him, Ji Yufeng said coldly, "You transformed them." Su Feng had a morbid smile on his face. How? They should have been the lowest level of humans in this apocalypse, but now, I have given them powerful power. Su Feng stretched out his hand and clenched his fist. This is simply a miracle of the Creator. Everyone in Yuhe, be thankful, you will witness the power of these experimental subjects before you die. Mu Qiu turned his head and looked at Lu Qingfei, who had already burst into tears, and smiled. I have to say that your boyfriend has a talent for comedy. Faced with Mu Qiu's ridicule, Lu Qingfei couldn't listen at all. At this moment, she looked at Su Feng and those human-faced monsters in disbelief, with pain and despair in her eyes. She couldn't imagine what kind of inhumane experiments had happened to these poor survivors, which would cause such a devil-like expression on their faces. And her boyfriend, who she had always been proud of, turned out to be the human-faced demon who caused them to suffer so much. Before Su Feng issued the order, these hideous human-faced monsters took the lead in attacking everyone. They hated and complained about these humans with intact bodies. These human-faced monsters, who had almost lost all their reason and humanity, only wanted to madly kill all the lives they could see. After being transformed, they had already become killing machines that could only destroy living things. So that's how it is. It seems that the big-headed monster baby I met in the hospital last time was also the work of the heterogeneous church. Mu Qiu stood aside and thought to himself that the big-headed monster baby was a rare and powerful heretic even in the A level. He had wondered before why heretics of this level would appear in the suburbs, but now he got the answer here. On the other hand, these human-faced monsters showed terrifying combat power as soon as they appeared. Although there were many A-level awakeners on the human side, they were all wounded after several battles. In addition, these terrifying human-faced monsters were huge in size and had no fighting skills. They were completely killing and attacking out of instinct, and did not care about their own injuries at all. This made the members of the search team and the law enforcement team miserable and unable to resist such a fierce attack. Soon, several A-level awakeners could not hold on and were killed and eaten by several human-faced monsters. The remaining B-level awakeners were beaten back step by step. Several of them were bitten off their heads by human-faced Tibetan mastiffs in one bite. The scene was extremely bloody and brutal. And the largest S-level human-faced spider directly waved its terrifying limbs and rushed towards Ji Yufeng with a ferocious face. Ji Yufeng's figure flashed and disappeared instantly. When he reappeared, he was already in the corner of the hall a few hundred meters away. Mu Qiu saw the scene from the side and narrowed his eyes slightly. Ji Yufeng took out 2 capsules from his suit pocket, swallowed them, and slowly pulled out the 2 cylindrical handles from his waist. Ji Yufeng held a handle in each hand, and the energy in his arms flowed into them. In an instant, 2 light blue lasers were emitted from the handles. These turned out to be 2 1-meter-long laser swords. After holding the 2 laser swords, Ji Yufeng's eyes instantly became sharp. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, Mo Xianyu. Chapter 76. When Ji Yufeng grasped the hilt of the laser sword, his expression under the glasses instantly became fierce. A powerful wave of supernatural power began to rise and explode around Ji Yufeng. Ji Yufeng's figure flashed, and the next moment he appeared on the head of the human-faced demon spider. Ji Yufeng's eyes were filled with cold light, and he turned his wrist holding a laser sword, and a brilliant blue arc flashed in the air. Swish! The next second, Ji Yufeng had already flashed to the ground of the hall. The four limbs of the human-faced demon spider were instantly cut off by the lightsaber, and the hideous human face screamed in pain. But what was surprising next was that the limbs of the giant spider that were cut off actually grew back at a speed visible to the naked eye, and the eyes of the woman in the head began to turn scarlet and violent. The tail of the human-faced demon spider began to spray dark green spider silk crazily. The spider silk, like a thick rope, sprayed on the human body, and instantly corroded it into a bloody skeleton. Even the blue brick glaze floor tiles were corroded into long and thin grooves. Even if an A-level awakener was stained with this mucus spider silk that was more terrifying than sulfuric acid, it would turn into a rotten corpse in an instant. This is the horror of the S-level heretic. At the same time, the human-faced demon spider began to rush towards Ji Yufeng, who was standing in the distance. Ji Yufeng stood in place, not afraid of the behemoth in front of him. Ji Yufeng, who was wearing a white suit, blew the frame of his glasses lightly, and his expression was cold and indifferent. He saw that he exerted force in his palm, and the laser sword he held instantly extended several feet. Immediately, the space around Ji Yufeng twisted in an instant, and in the blink of an eye, Ji Yufeng disappeared from the spot. Mu Qiu watched the scene from a distance with a look of surprise in his eyes. Is it teleportation? No, Ji Yufeng's speed is obviously several times faster than that of the fat man, and even Mu Qiu's naked eyes can't catch Ji Yufeng's whereabouts. The power of space. Mu Qiu narrowed his eyes slightly, and the next second he saw a vortex suddenly appear under the belly of the running human-faced demon spider, and a figure flashed in the vortex. It was the white death god Ji Yufeng. At this moment, he finally understood the powerful superpower of Ji Yufeng, an S-level superpower, who was called the white death god by the Yuhei base. Space shuttle. Yes, this is different from the super high-speed movement of the fat man, nor is it like the instant movement of the rabbit spell in Mu Qiu's body. This is a high-powered superpower involving the field of time and space. Mu Qiu finally understood why Ji Yufeng, as a human, could compete with the previous Flame Demon Lord, relying on this powerful space superpower. Ji Yufeng held a foot-long laser sword in his hand and rushed it into the lower abdomen of the human-faced demon spider. Dark green blood splattered, and the human-faced demon spider staggered and wailed to the ground, while Ji Yufeng moved and stopped in mid-air, swinging his lightsaber to cut off the 8 limbs of the human-faced demon spider. Waste. Seeing Ji Yufeng's fierce means, Su Feng in front of the skull throne knew that he had to go all out now. He immediately ordered the dozen or so alien followers around him to resist the offensive of the law enforcement team and many awakened people, and instead drove the other several transformed human-faced monsters to focus their fire on Ji Yufeng. And Su Feng's words were like gods in the ears of those human-faced monsters. After hearing Su Feng's orders, those hideous monsters actually showed fear on their faces. Then they really gave up the human blood food in front of them and turned to collectively attack Ji Yufeng in the distance. On the other hand, although the human side had an advantage in numbers, after fighting for more than a dozen floors, some team members were already wounded, and several high-level awakened people were killed in the battle with the human-faced monsters just now. So only a dozen or so hetero-Christians actually fought back and forth with these awakened members of the search team. An awakened member of the search team had half of his body bitten off by a Tibetan Mastiff, and he lay in a pool of blood, gasping for breath, but the next second a flash of knife light flashed and directly cut his throat. The hetero-Christians in black robes walked out slowly with long knives in their hands, with a gloomy and bloodthirsty murderous intent on their faces. Wei Linger had sharp claws and agile movements. She had just killed a hetero-Christian, but another cold knife light flashed behind her. At the critical moment, a crystal blue ice arrow rushed over and shot straight into the heart of the hetero-Christian behind her. Wei Ling'er turned around in a panic and saw Mu Qiu, who was wearing a black windbreaker, holding an ice longbow and smiling at her. Wei Ling'er felt warm in her heart, and smiled back at Mu Qiu, and then went into the battle again. Mu Qiu's face returned to normal. He held the gorgeous ice longbow in his hand and pulled the bowstring with his right hand. A ball of misty frost slowly condensed into an ice arrow. He casually shot and killed another foreign believer who intended to attack Yue Qi and Su Wen. Mu Qiu yawned and no longer cared about the tragic fight on the field. He turned to look at the fierce battle on the larger battlefield in the distance. This was a battle that belonged to the White Death God. Rather than a battle, it was a gorgeous sacrifice for the Death God to harvest life. Mu Qiu could clearly see that there were illusory vortices appearing from time to time above the entire hall, and Ji Yufeng's figure was constantly wandering in these space vortices. Just like the Death God who was asking for his life in hell, holding two brilliant laser swords in his hands, he could handle it with ease even if he was besieged by several human-faced monsters. The arcs of lasers in the hall kept flashing, and every time Ji Yufeng's white figure disappeared, these huge monsters would have a few more tragic scars on their bodies. In the end, even Su Feng, the leader, had to go into battle himself and fight against the White Death God Ji Yufeng with several experimental subjects. So far, Ji Yufeng has fought against two S-level and several A-level powerful beings alone. Mu Qiu couldn't help but marvel at the scene of Ji Yufeng running rampant among the monsters. This Ji Yufeng is worthy of his title of White Death God. He is extremely powerful and talented. But the energy consumed by this level of space shuttle must be several times that of ordinary people. I don't know how many rounds Ji Yufeng can hold on. Sure enough, after a while, Ji Yufeng's fierce and swift attack stopped. He stood on a wall of the hall and stopped moving. A layer of sweat appeared on his forehead. On the other hand, on the side of the heterogeneous sect, several huge monsters were already covered with scars from laser swords. Even the S-level human-faced demon spider had its limbs cut off at this moment, and only a small piece of flesh buds regenerated. After all, they were transformed monsters without reason. Even though they had amazing destructive power, they could not react to Ji Yufeng's swift and flexible attack and could only passively take the beating. Su Feng's originally bloody robe was stained with blood again, and his pale face was embarrassed. He did not expect that Ji Yufeng's strength would be so fierce and powerful, and so many high-level monsters were not his opponents. But now seeing that Ji Yufeng was also exhausted, Su Feng grinned, revealing a pair of bat-like fangs, and smiled sinisterly, "You are worthy of being the White Death God of Yuhe. It is your ability to hold on until now. The energy in your body is almost exhausted, right? Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the Flame Demon Lord." Author, Mo Xian Yu. Chapter 77. Ji Yufeng stepped slowly on the wall, and beneath him were roaring ferocious monsters, as if they would rush over and tear him to pieces in the next second. Hearing Su Feng's mocking words, Ji Yufeng did not refute, but raised his arms, and the two gorgeous laser swords suddenly merged. Immediately, dozens of dangling white vortices suddenly appeared in the space around Ji Yufeng. In each illusory vortex, a white figure slowly walked out. Everyone looked closely and found that these dozens of figures were exactly the appearance of Ji Yufeng. Interesting. Mu Qiu stroked his chin, looking at the dozen or so Ji Yufeng who walked out of the space vortex, and a touch of interest appeared in his eyes. Then, the dozen or so Ji Yufeng who emerged from the vortex held two lightsabers in their hands, put their hands together and made the same action at the same time. As the two laser swords merged, a huge blue beam shot out. Su Feng looked at the scene in front of him in horror, and his intuition told him that there was a fatal threat hidden in this laser. I saw more than a dozen Ji Yufeng put their laser swords together at the same time, surrounding Su Feng and many human-faced monsters, and dozens of laser giant pillars exploded together, and the final target was Su Feng. Not good. Su Feng's heart was shocked, and what was reflected in his pupils was dense blue beams bombarding him directly. Boom! The earth-shattering attack shook the entire club building, and the tiles and stones flew, like an earthquake. The sound instantly alarmed the law enforcement team and the people of the heterogeneous church who were fighting fiercely on the side. Thick smoke enveloped the hall, and the ground where several monsters were originally located had been cracked and shattered by the powerful attack, and the red bricks of the carpet on the next floor were clearly visible. After the thick smoke, a figure in a white suit floated into the air. It was Ji Yufeng. It's the captain. Seeing Ji Yufeng's appearance, everyone in the law enforcement team was shocked. But at this moment, Ji Yufeng's face was no longer calm. The laser sword in his hand was dim, and the light curtain flashed under the lens, but his eyes were looking straight at the deep pit caused by the explosion directly below. Everyone looked at it intently, and saw a huge figure rolling in the huge pit. It was the S-level human-faced demon spider. However, the human-faced demon spider at this moment looked extremely tragic, with dark green blood all over its body, paralyzed limbs, and the tail that sprayed spider silk was even more scorched. This was all the result of the fierce attack of the laser cannon just now. On the other hand, most of the other A-level human-faced monsters were bombarded into slag, and those who survived also collapsed on the ground, bleeding like a fountain. Su Feng climbed up from the belly of the human-faced demon spider. He had just hit in the chest and abdomen of the human-faced demon spider to survive this fatal blow. Su Feng stood up in embarrassment, looking at Ji Yufeng with a strong fear in his eyes. He turned his head and looked at the alien cultists who were fighting with the law enforcement team and the awakened members of the search team. There were only a few alive at this moment. Good, very good. Su Feng had an inexplicable smile on his pale face, which made people feel scared. Lu Qingfei in the crowd stared at Su Feng in a daze. She could no longer recognize that this gloomy and terrifying monster like a vampire was her former fiancé. Su Feng looked at Lu Qingfei affectionately. "Dear, don't worry, no one can take you away from me. Don't you always want to destroy this place?" Su Feng's laughter was a little hysterical. "In this case, I will let you witness the highest masterpiece in the space." Su Feng suddenly bent down, his back bent into a strange arc, and then a pair of blood-red wings like a demon suddenly spread out from under his red robe. Su Feng suddenly flew to a high altitude, took out a remote control device from his arms, and pressed it hard. He looked at Ji Yufeng and laughed wildly. "White Death, be glad, because you will witness a miracle here." As soon as Su Feng finished speaking, suddenly, the whole building began to shake violently like an earthquake. Look at that sphere." Everyone looked and saw that the surface of the giant pillar that was originally used to support the entire building gradually had layers of cracks emerging, followed by pieces of debris falling. The green sphere at the top of the giant pillar now looked more like a giant egg that nurtured life, and it seemed that something was about to break out of the shell. Witness it carefully. This is the experiment No. 001 that I have devoted all my efforts to. Ji Yufeng looked at the dark green sphere, and his eyes finally trembled a little. Inside, he felt a powerful energy fluctuation. Just as everyone was dumbfounded, the next moment, the dark green giant shell suddenly broke, followed by the shattering and collapse of the building's foundation pillar. What's going on? Feeling the ground shaking, everyone began to panic. Could it be that the giant pillar connecting the entire building is the body of this monster? Someone saw something and said this fact in a rolling throat. Now this monster is about to wake up, and the whole building is about to collapse. As soon as these words came out, everyone was shocked beyond words, and they felt their heartbeats slowed down. The whole building was actually made up of a heretic. Su Fengfei suddenly laughed in the air and said, "It would take some time to wake it up. Thanks to you guys who provided so much fresh blood after you came in, it has finally been awakened now." The crowd then understood that this was the real purpose of the heterogeneous cult, to attract them to encircle and suppress them, including the zombies on each floor, which were all to provide nutrients for the monsters in this building. The ground under their feet suddenly began to crack inch by inch, and they heard the violent sounds of the floors below collapsing one after another. I believe that in a few minutes, the entire building will collapse and be destroyed. It's too late. Ji Yufeng's eyes flashed, and his figure flashed through the space and came to the law enforcement team, saying, "Leave here first." Ji Yufeng stretched out his hands to operate his supernatural power, and a white light curtain enveloped everyone. He wanted to use the ability of Space Shuttle to take everyone away. Just as his special power was flashing and he was about to activate it, a sinister and hoarse voice suddenly came, "Qingfei, you are mine." The next moment, Su Feng appeared from nowhere, broke through the defense of the space shield, and ran straight towards Lu Qingfei in the crowd with a hideous face. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the Flame Demon Lord. Author, Mo Xianyu. Chapter 78. The green rock walls around the hall began to shake violently. The whole building seemed to have lost its load-bearing bridge, and everyone felt the stairs below begin to break and collapse layer by layer. What's more terrifying is that after a fierce battle, the ground was already covered with human blood, and in the end, all the blood that formed a river actually flowed into the dark green sphere in the center of the hall. As the huge amount of blood flowed in, the eggshell-like sphere also accelerated its cracking speed, with a halo flickering on it, and dark green energy fragments fell like eggshells. Feeling the strong energy fluctuations coming from inside, Ji Yufeng's face finally became solemn. He used up all his superpowers to wrap the remaining search team and law enforcement team in a white space light shield. The energy in his body was instantly consumed, and Ji Yufeng's face turned pale at a speed visible to the naked eye. Ji Yufeng's mind moved, and he was about to use his ability to take dozens of people to shuttle through space. But suddenly, a blood-red figure suddenly broke a gap in the space barrier he set up, and swooped down towards one of the team. "Qingfei, my wife, I will never lose you again this time." Su Feng, dressed in a red robe, looked pale, with a pair of fangs clearly visible at the corners of his mouth. He was wearing a blood-red robe and floating in the air like a fierce vampire. "Su Feng." Lu Qingfei looked at her old lover in front of her. The completely subverted image made her unbelievable that the murderous demon in front of her was her kind and upright fiancé in the past. Lu Qingfei's steps began to retreat involuntarily, and the tears that had long dried up flowed down the corners of her eyes again. "No, you are not him, and the Su Feng in my heart will never be like you." Lu Qingfei no longer had the gentle look of the past, and her expression when she looked at Su Feng was full of strangeness. After hearing the ruthless words of concubine Lu Qing denying their relationship, Su Feng's face suddenly became fierce. "No, you are my wife, forever. Concubine Qing, follow me, I can bring you the life you want." Su Feng's figure flashed, and the bloody figure quickly passed through the air, and his target was concubine Lu Qing below. This is a fierce attack from an S-level awakener. Everyone was on guard, and several awakeners rushed forward to stop Su Feng. Su Feng's arm stretched out from his robe, and his nails stretched out and became extremely sharp, with a trace of blood flashing on them. Several strong mutant awakeners were pierced through the neck by Su Feng's extended claws before they even had a face-to-face fight. In an instant, the blood in the bodies of several awakeners quickly flowed away, and they turned directly into shriveled corpses. Su Feng, who pulled out his claws, rushed towards concubine Lu Qing without any pause, and his twisted and open 5 fingers seemed to have sworn his control over the beauty in front of him. Lu Qingfei looked at her husband who was getting closer and closer to her, and she couldn't help but feel an extreme fear in her heart. In despair, she subconsciously raised her arms and closed her eyes in despair. But after waiting for a moment, the familiar and crazy voice in her ear stopped abruptly. Lu Qingfei raised her head, but saw a slender and tall figure blocking her way. The familiar black windbreaker fluttered, just like a god blocking the horrible disaster ahead for Lu Qingfei. Mu Qiu. Lu Qingfei never thought that when she was desperate, the person who stood in front of her was actually this cold-blooded boy who disagreed with her ideas and even had some grudges. Su Feng's forehead was bulging with veins. Looking at the ice double blades blocking his claws, his fangs and teeth flashed with a sinister cold light. You are looking for death. Mu Qiu raised the corner of his mouth, and while blocking Su Feng's way, he turned his head to look at the urban beauty behind him and smiled. This is not like your style, my great saint. In fact, Mu Qiu just watched this family drama with a mentality of watching the excitement, but a familiar and cold mechanical voice suddenly came in his mind, which directly shocked Mu Qiu. Ding! Congratulations to the host for checking in at the Great World Entertainment Club and unlocking the reward Najia's mask, can summon the Shadow Army. The next check-in location the final battle of the Redemption battlefield, and the reward is a random devil fruit from the One Piece plane. I hope the host will keep up the good work, and the Great World sign-in system will always be with you. The cold mechanical voice fell silent again, as if everything that just came to his ears was a fantasy. Because of this, Mu Qiu fought desperately to resist Su Feng's attack for Lu Qingfei. Hearing Mu Qiu's usual teasing words, looking at the tall and broad back in front of her, Lu Qingfei's eyes became wet again for some reason. Mu Qiu looked at the vampire who was only a few feet away from him again, with an inexplicable meaning in his eyes. Now, let me play with you. Mu Qiu's ice blades rushed forward, and then his body shook, and he stepped on the ice and rushed to the far side of the hall. At the same time, Ji Yufeng also used Space Shuttle to attack Su Feng, and many awakened people from the law enforcement team appeared in front of Lu Qingfei. Mu Qiu's words were no less than sarcastic ridicule in Su Feng's eyes, and he saw that the great opportunity had been lost. Su Feng was angry and turned his blood wings open, and turned to fly towards Mu Qiu. The rock wall beside everyone began to collapse, and the bricks and stones under their feet began to fall. Ji Yufeng looked in the direction of Mu Qiu in the distance, but time was obviously not enough for him to rescue Mu Qiu. Ji Yufeng's mind moved, and his space ability was activated. A white mist flashed in the space barrier that engulfed everyone, and then an illusory vortex swallowed everyone directly. Everyone felt the rapid airflow around them, and in the blink of an eye they had appeared on a floor where zombies were cleared before. Similarly, the collapse of this floor was more serious, and the rubble of the ceiling fell like a meteorite. The next moment, another white light flashed, and everyone kept shuttling through the building more than 10 stories high. Ji Yufeng, who led everyone to shuttle through space, had sweat on his forehead. With so many people in a large-scale space crossing, such a huge load was already unbearable for him. Wait. Mu Qiu is still inside, Wei Linger shouted at Ji Yufeng. Ji Yufeng glanced at Wei Linger with a calm expression. The middle-aged man beside him hurriedly explained, "It's too late, Yufeng's body can't hold on any longer." Wei Linger looked at the constantly changing scene in front of her, and her worries about Mu Qiu could not be any greater. Yi Qi stood beside Wei Linger, staring blankly at the direction upstairs. "Qiu. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the Flame Demon Lord." Author, Mo Xianyu. Chapter 79. On the other side, in the collapsing rooftop of the club. Looking at the people who had completely disappeared, Su Feng, wearing a red robe and looking like a vampire, gritted his teeth and looked at Mu Qiu in front of him with murderous intent. It was because of this man that he failed to take Lu Qingfei away in the end. It doesn't matter. Su Feng laughed in a deep voice, "I'll deal with you first, and I can take Qingfei away after the number 1 experiment wakes up. None of you can escape." Mu Qiu suddenly laughed, still looking free and easy. "Are you so sure that you can deal with me?" A powerful energy wave suddenly erupted from Su Feng's body, with great momentum. This is a powerful energy that only S-level beings can possess. The energy in Su Feng's body was stimulated to the extreme. He suddenly threw away his blood-red robe, and the clothes inside burst with it, revealing a strong, like a beast with explosive power. This is the powerful body nourished by the blood essence he absorbed. Mu Qiu was amazed. This body alone was comparable to the previous Jin Xiong with the unparalleled strange power ability, and even better. Su Feng looked at Mu Qiu with a bloodthirsty look in his eyes and grinned. "Don't worry, I won't kill you immediately, I will keep you in captivity and make you my blood food. Zizi, I haven't tasted the taste of the awakened blood of the elemental system yet." Mu Qiu lowered his head and murmured, "I'd love to see you, let me see what's so great about you." Su Feng suddenly saw that the corners of Mu Qiu's lowered mouth suddenly opened a strange arc, and the black robe behind him moved without wind. Then he muttered with a faint excitement, "Pleasure me, ants." An unimaginable shocking wave suddenly rushed into the sky like a surging wave. The entire building even accelerated the process of collapse because of this extremely powerful energy fluctuation. What is this? Su Feng's eyes widened. He suddenly found that this powerful fluctuation that made his soul tremble appeared from Mu Qiu in front of him. At the same time, the remaining members of the search team and the law enforcement team kept shuttling in the space light shield condensed by Ji Yufeng. After just a dozen breaths, everyone came to the outside of the club building. Ji Yufeng manipulated the space light shield to lead everyone forward hundreds of meters, and then lifted the huge space barrier. At this time, Ji Yufeng's face was extremely pale, and his forehead was soaked with sweat. The chest part of the white suit rose and fell rapidly, and Ji Yufeng covered his chest and gasped heavily. In just a dozen breaths, every second was squeezing the few energies in his body. And just a few seconds after everyone arrived safely on the ground, the towering building hundreds of meters behind them also collapsed in an instant. The loud noise of the building collapsing continued throughout the city center, instantly attracting the attention of a large group of zombie heretics around. "What is that?" Before everyone recovered from the disaster, some survivors pointed at the collapsed building behind them and exclaimed. A towering tree rose from the collapsed building, reaching a height of more than 10 feet straight into the sky. The giant tree was a strange dark green color, with no leaves on the branches, but instead layers of thick vines like tentacles. In the center of the trunk, there was a terrifying wide vertical eye, which suddenly opened and stared at the many survivors below. It was just born and was extremely eager for this kind of blood food full of vitality. As the shocking supernatural power fluctuations came, the middle-aged man next to Ji Yufeng breathed a sigh of relief, but the cautious look on his face was still strong. It has not reached the level of destruction, but this monster is also at the top level in S level just based on the level of supernatural power. It's really extreme. This alien cult actually intends to use the resources of the entire Lannan city to create a destructive existence. It has not reached the level of destruction yet. This means that everyone still has a glimmer of hope. Ji Yufeng nodded and did not speak. At this moment, a monster-like roar came from behind the crowd. "It's zombies! A lot of zombies!" Everyone turned around suddenly and saw that a large number of zombie monsters had gathered behind them at some point. The dense crowds of people were rushing towards the survivors. They were all attracted by the sound of the building collapsing. In an instant, the human camp fell into an embarrassing situation of being surrounded by enemies and attacked from all sides. Looking at the survivors who were depressed and desperate, Ji Yufeng made an amazing move. He took out a copper box from his arms, which contained capsule-shaped medicine. Seeing the box of medicine, the middle-aged man next to Ji Yufeng exclaimed, "Yufeng, are you crazy? You have taken this medicine once before. If you take it again, your body will not be able to bear this load." Hearing the threatening words of the middle-aged man, Ji Yufeng took out a few capsules and swallowed them directly as if he had never heard of it before. In an instant, veins on Ji Yufeng's forehead popped up, and a look of pain appeared on his face. Ji Yufeng endured the strong discomfort in his body and took out the 2 long-durated laser sword handles from his waist. He took out 2 blue crystal cores from his arms and stuffed them into the lower end of the hilts. He clenched his hands and exerted force, and the 2 laser swords flashed dazzling light again. The moment he held the hilts, the light screen in Ji Yufeng's glasses flashed, and his eyes became as sharp as an eagle's eye. The scene returned to a few minutes ago, when the 14-story building was on the verge of collapse. Debris was scattered, and the collapsed boulders poured madly towards the floor tiles. Su Feng, with a shriveled body, fell to the ground. His chest was pierced by a giant icicle, and his abdomen was burned black by the flames, as if it would fall apart into dust if the wind blew. Su Feng looked terrified, and the horror in his eyes was almost overflowing, and blood was constantly seeping out of his mouth. How is it possible? How can a human have such power? Monster, you are the real monster. He never thought that as a vampire, he would be sucked dry and devoured by someone one day. Beside him, a man in a black windbreaker walked slowly, not paying any attention to the rubble that kept falling down around him. Mu Qiu turned a deaf ear to Su Feng's panicked and shocked words, and walked to a wall of the hall leisurely. The wall was full of masks used in masquerade balls. And in the center of these masks, a mask that was as hideous as a demon but familiar to Mu Qiu came into view. Finally, I found you. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, Mo Xianyu. Chapter 80. A demon mask with 2 horns on its head, a red face and fangs appeared in Mu Qiu's hand. Najia's mask is one of the masks of the 9 ghost generals in the Black Shadow Corps. The person wearing this mask will be influenced and controlled by the soul of the ghost general sealed in it, tempting the wearer to release the darkness deep in his heart and summon soldiers belonging to the Black Shadow Corps. And Najia's mask can summon the most common ninja group in the Black Shadow Corps. The Holy Lord once fought in all directions with this mask, and the ninja group also made immortal military achievements for the Holy Lord, the ancient demon. Now, this mask is in Mu Qiu's hands. Because the animation Jackie Chan Adventures does not exist in this parallel world, Mu Qiu is not worried that the mask will be recognized. After looking at the hideous mask in his hand for a while, Mu Qiu smiled and shook his head. If it weren't for the fact that a ghost general of the Black Shadow Kingdom was sealed in it, it would only be a scary prop for Halloween on the surface. The surrounding walls began to collapse rapidly, and the rubble on the ceiling splashed and fell. Mu Qiu was standing in the center of this earthquake at this moment. The first thing Mu Qiu did after getting the mask was not to put it on his face, but to slowly walk to the figure lying on the ground in the distance. Faint footsteps came from the front. The haggard Su Feng barely opened his heavy eyes, but saw Mu Qiu's handsome face with a smile. I'm more curious, how did you become like this when you were so upright in front of the Holy Mother Lu? Or is that the heterogeneous church really so attractive? Mu Qiu squatted down, rubbed his eyes with one hand, and had a playful look on his face. The rocks that hit him were all blocked and bounced away by a thick ice wall without exception. Su Feng's throat rolled. Now he was just a spent force. In this state, even speaking would take all his strength. Do you know what I've been through in the past 2 years? Su Feng's face had long since turned into that of a normal person, with a bitter smile on his lips. In this wasteland, I've seen people bullying people, people killing people, people eating people. In this cruel apocalypse, human nature is far more terrifying than zombie monsters. Su Feng's pupils widened, as if he saw something he longed for, and he stretched out his hand to grab the void. Only with real power can you survive here. I want to survive, I want to bring Qingfei a better life, I want to be the real king of this area. Su Feng grinned and said bitterly, heterogeneous church, I don't care what kind of cult it is, as long as it can give me the power to surpass all living beings, I can help it do things. Mu smiled, you see it clearly, but unfortunately, you still lost in the end. It was not unfair for Su Feng to be defeated by Mu, the corpse king who ruled a region. Yes, I lost miserably. At this time, Su Feng seemed to have returned to his original self, the honest and kind husband in Lu Qingfei's mouth. Now I am no longer worthy of being Qingfei's husband, I hope you can take good care of her. It turned out that Su Feng saw Mu stand up to save Lu Qingfei, so he thought that Lu Qingfei had already been Mu woman. You seem to have misunderstood something. I have nothing to do with that Lu Shenmue. Mu was a little amused. The reason why he just showed up was entirely because of the appearance of the system. He took this opportunity to stay in order to get the mask. But Su Feng turned a blind eye to Mu words. Obviously, he didn't want to say anything more about the relationship between the two. Experimental subject 001 was cultivated by me with all my efforts. His strength is also at the top of the S level, protect Qingfei. Suddenly, Su Feng laughed at himself again, that's right, with your strength, my worry is unnecessary. Looking at Su Feng talking to himself, Mu forehead was covered with black lines. This is the first person who made Mu speechless. Well, Mu decided to name him Su Dezhuai. But Su Feng's voice became weaker and weaker. Lannan City was originally the territory of a destructive, terrifying existence. We reached an agreement with her to establish a base here. Be careful of her. When he said this, the focus in Su Feng's eyes had completely dimmed. He stretched out his bony hands to grab the air and said hoarsely in a weak voice, I am unwilling, this, damn, end of the world. Su Feng's raised head completely drooped, and there was still a deep attachment and unwillingness in his pupils. Looking at Su Dezhuai, who had completely lost his breath, Mu slowly stood up. At the same time, he also retracted his palm that was emitting the healing halo of the horse spell. Su Feng's state was already exhausted. If Mu hadn't used the healing power of the horse spell to prolong his life, the former would never have said so many last words. For Mu, there are certainly many ways to save Su Feng. However, it is possible to save him, but it is not necessary. After all, it is Su Dezhuai. After sending Su Dezhuai away, Mu lowered his head and looked at the red mask in his hand. Ghost General? Then let me see how powerful he is. Mu opened his 5 claws and took the mask, gently covering his face with it. Instantly, a thick black gas visible to the naked eye spread out from the hideous mask. Mu figure also grew several times in an instant, and a pair of devil-like black wings broke through the wide windbreaker and spread out from behind him. These devil-like wide wings are the ability he gained after swallowing Su Feng's superpowers just now. Mu skin surface also slowly climbed, and the red lines continued to spread. Even Mu eyes gradually turned red, and a dragon tail was faintly emerging behind him. This is the rhythm of transforming into the Flame Demon Lord. Following the changes in Mu body, the black gas emitted from the mask became more and more dense, and finally the black gas filled with dark power directly spread throughout the entire floor. He. At the same time, a gloomy voice came from Mu mind. A tall figure wearing samurai armor appeared in Mu mind. On his face was a hideous demon mask, which was the evil soul sealed in the mask, Niga, the leader of the ninja group and one of the 9 ghost generals. General Niga is resurrected. The eerie voice echoed in the dark space. Niga opened his red eyes from the darkness, and he couldn't wait to devour those dark souls. Young man, do you desire power? Niga walked out of the darkness slowly, and his words were full of temptation. Power. Suddenly, a more gloomy voice echoed in this dark space. Before Niga recovered, he saw a monster several feet tall, with a red body, a dragon head and a human body walking out of the darkness. The power of ants. The voice of the Flame Demon Lord was heavy and low, and his tone was full of disdain and contempt. You are. Nigel looked at the intimidating Flame Demon Lord, his red eyes were horrified, and his voice trembled. P.S. Friends who like this book, please don't forget to give it a 5-star rating. Your support and encouragement are the author's unremitting motivation for writing. Love you.